We are very happy to have Jeff Halper here tonight. Jeff grew up in Minnesota and then moved to Israel in 1973. He's an anthropologist, and he has, for decades now, he has been very active in fighting for peace with justice within Israel, and he is one of the co-founders of the Israeli Committee Against Housing Demolitions, and with Ghassan Andoni, he was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize by the American Friends Service Committee for their work opposing the structural violence within Israel. So the program tonight, Jeff's going to talk for maybe 3/4 of an hour, then we will have time for questions and answers. And then after that, Jeff's new book is hot off the press. Anybody who wants to buy a copy is invited to do so. And Jeff is here and he'll sign it. So that sounds pretty good. So without any more ado, let's welcome Jeff Halper.
Thanks for hosting me, the Diablo Center. And I have the new book here that I thought I'd talk about tonight. A lot of you, I don't know if is this picking up?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, it's good. A lot of you, I know, are active on the Israel-Palestine issue, which continues to be an important issue. We certainly are not close to resolving it. But at the same time, you know, as an activist for, you know, I've headed the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions for the last 20 years. But I've been active in the Israeli peace movement for more than 40 years. And over the years, as I've been working to resist the occupation, a question was always kind of nagging in the back of my mind. How does Israel get away with this? In other words, here you've got almost 50 years of occupation. At a time when human rights has become very common, you know, even among, you know, in the general discourse, international law, you know, we're certainly well beyond the age of colonialism. Racism, which still exists, is nevertheless, you know, people are more aware of it. So how, given all of that, and of course, the communication, the media, I mean, it's all on TV. It's not like hidden away in the Congo or in Vietnam even. But, you know, this is the Israel-Palestine conflict is probably the most documented, researched, and filmed conflict that's ever existed. In the Holy Land, no less. So it's right in the center of the view of churches, on the southern border of Europe. You know, a close strategic ally of the United States, very connected to the Jewish community. I mean, you can go on and on and on. It's amazing how transparent, how visual this conflict is, and how much it goes against really especially the grain of more liberal people, but the grain of people in general. You know, 50 or 60 years, 70 years after colonialism, and yet Israel gets away with it. Massive violations of human rights, of course, defiance of international law, defiance of dozens of UN resolutions, and yet the worse things get, the more Israel has support of governments. You know, Europe, I mean, really all over the world. China these days, India, Nigeria, Brazil, the United States, of course. Which brings up the, so I have a cough, which brings up the question, why? What's going on here? How does Israel get away with this? Well, the usual explanations didn't really work for me. You know, AIPAC. You know, the power of AIPAC. Well, AIPAC has clout, it's true. And the Jewish community, the organized Jewish community has clout. I would say it's far from running the American government. And at the same time, you can't, that has an influence in the US. And at different times, you know, you've got Stephen Harper in Canada, who was the last prime minister, was a Christian Zionist. And you know, in other words, the Jewish lobby has a certain clout in certain countries, but it doesn't explain China. It's become very supportive of Israel. It doesn't explain India. It doesn't explain Europe. Well, the other explanation is guilt over the Holocaust. Well, that might play a role in Germany, which it does. Germany has what it calls a special relationship with Israel. Maybe in a country like Poland, which is very ambivalent about its role. But I don't think that plays much of a role in the United States. Matter of fact, I think most Americans don't even know there was a Holocaust. And, you know, and it certainly, again, doesn't play a role in Asia or in Latin America, where there's a lot of support for Israel among governments. Well, then, you know, Christian Zionists, Christian fundamentalists, again, in the US, in the Republican Party, you know, that might play a role. Stephen Harper in Canada. Holland actually has a fairly strong Christian Zionist population, but that's about it. I mean, the Christian Zionists don't have much clout in Europe, and not in the rest of the world either. So all those explanations, the kind of the common sense ones, just didn't explain why Israel gets the international support it gets. Something else was going on here. There was an elephant in the room, let's say, that we weren't looking at. So all these years I've been working to resist the occupation, house demolitions, taking of land, you know, human rights violations, against the building of settlements, and so on and so on. So I thought, well, instead of looking down at the occupation and what Israel's doing and trying to understand, let me look up. Because obviously, if Israel's getting support from governments all over the world, it's got to be delivering something. There's got to be a quid pro quo here. Why are governments supporting Israel? So when you look up, a whole different kind of a map of Israel's place in the world begins to emerge. Because what we always hear, of course, is that Israel's this little country, besieged by terrorism. Israelis call themselves a villa in the jungle, or you know, a little Jewish kid in a very rough neighborhood. The whole idea is we're the victims. We're this little, you know, a Jewish kid in the ghetto that's getting beat up all the time. Well, all of a sudden, when you look at Israel, from the perspective of its military, security, and police roles in the world, a whole different picture begins to emerge. Israel has, and I'm putting these things together, the military, because we usually think of them as separate things. The military, the army out there, you know, the security forces, Homeland Security, the FBI, and so on, you know, in here, and then our police forces that are more state or local police forces, and that we've always seen them as fairly separate. But certainly since 9/11, as a matter of fact, with the rise of the idea of Homeland Security employs something like 700,000 people in the United States. So it's a huge industry, and it combines these sorts of things. So, so if you take the military and security and policing together, they constitute a worldwide industry of $2.5 trillion a year. Now, one reason I wrote the book is because, I mean, it was interesting. You write a book about something you know nothing about. I mean, I couldn't tell you a howitzer from a machine gun. I don't know this stuff, and we don't know this stuff. And yet I said to myself, here I am, a political activist, trying to deal with one of the major conflicts in the world, but in general, trying to be involved and informed about the issues of the world and so on. I don't know anything about a $2.5 trillion a year industry. It's got to have tremendous impact. $2.5 trillion on economies. Don't forget, a lot of the largest arms buyers are the poorest countries that we peddle to. We peddle arms to some of the poorest countries. It's got to have a tremendous effect on societies. Small arms, you know, the pistols and rifles, and small arms kill infinitely more people than tanks and F-16s and nuclear missiles. I mean, these are the big, sexy weapons that we think about as war. But it's, in fact, it's the small arms that kill, and kill women and children in particular, even more than men in many cases.